Hi everybody, this is August 5th, 2026, and I've been posting these videos as a form of therapy in my recovery from the trauma of watching my little brother, Paul Karen, 64 with Down syndrome, be locked away by the British Columbia New Democratic Party government, David Eby as leader, Nikki Sharma as Attorney General, and Sheila Malcolmson as the minister responsible for Paul's care. Paul and I grew up together. I remember when he was brought home from the hospital, he was 2 years younger than me, and I spent my childhood helping to care for him. When he got lost, the Sudbury police would always recruit me to find him. I taught him to read and print the only word that it took me about a year as a little girl to teach him to print his first name, Paul. That's how I knew the document that the government created to appoint my 82-year-old Catholic nun sister 4,000 kilometers away in Ontario as Paul's guardian was a forgery. So they locked him away. I had an agreement with the government that I could visit Paul twice a week, once at his group home and once at my home. And I would take him out to movies. I took him to Newfoundland twice. I took him to Seattle. But when the government found out I had complained to the police, I discovered the document, which was supposed to be done in an open way, because Paul had other siblings. He had six living siblings at the time the government appointed the nun in 4,000 kilometers away as his guardian. So as soon as they found out I'd complained to the Burnaby RCMP police about the fraudulent forged power of attorney, I got a letter from the nun's lawyer saying that my visits were terminated. And then I got a letter from the group home's lawyer saying I would never see my brother again. He was my last surviving family member in Greater Vancouver, and I was his last surviving family member. So they essentially locked him away like a prisoner. So after I did everything I could think of. I was trained as a psychologist. I worked as a psychologist for the government with mentally handicapped adults. And then when I could see that they needed legal representation, I was the first single mother to graduate from law school in British Columbia history. And I was a federal prosecutor for several years before I was hired by Carrie Lynn Finlay, who's now the leader of the opposition in British Columbia, of the Conservative Party of British Columbia. So she hired me on May 24th of 1994, and I worked for her for several years, and then I went out on my own, and I practiced law for 23 years until I was disabled in an accident in 2008, and I could only work part-time after that, and then I stopped working as a lawyer altogether in 2016. But when they locked Paul away, I did everything I could think of to try and restore our visits, including to become his guardian. There were lots of irregularities in my application to become Paul's guardian. I had prepared the 6 binders of evidence, medical reports, and they disappeared off the judge's desk. And all that was left were the evidence that was produced by my sister's lawyers. I estimate that the Catholic Church spent more than $2 million on her legal representation. She had a lawyer in Ottawa named Charles Gibson who acted for pedophile priests and nuns. And she also hired a lawyer in Vancouver named Casey Deanshaw, who worked for a law firm, Borden, Ladner, Gervais, a huge Canadian law firm down by the in downtown Vancouver. So they just pulled out all the stops because, I was alleging that they were relying on a fraudulent and forged document. And apparently they had hundreds of these documents for all the mentally handicapped people they were responsible for, so they could give them the COVID-19 shot. So the government was very motivated. David Eby, who is truly an evil man, he's an evil, corrupt man. He supported my sister in her attempts to isolate and confine Paul against his will. So after all of my attempts were exhausted, I was only allowed a 10-minute telephone call once a week with Paul. He begged me to visit him. He said that he would vacuum for me. He thought that he was doing something wrong. He didn't understand why we couldn't visit. It was the most sadistically cruel thing. And then I got a call from Casey Deanshaw on April 15th of 2024 saying that Paul had had a stroke and I could arrange a visit. So they allowed me to have in-person visits once they thought that I couldn't get a sample of Paul's signature for court. So I dropped everything and raced to Burnaby Hospital. And Paul appeared to be doing really well. He squeezed my hand so tight when I said, "Paul, it's Kathleen." It was the first time I had seen him in 588 days. And he appeared to be recovering really well. He grabbed a book from my hand. He sat up, turned the pages perfectly, made good eye contact. He had an oxygen mask and a ventilator and other medical supports. But my sister put him in a room where it was only her and him. Nobody else was allowed in the room. And I was only allowed a 10-minute visit once a day, although I sat out in the hallway for 10 to 12 hours a day. During the time that I was there, I got a phone call from the Burnaby RCMP, and they said that they had been ordered by their Ottawa Oversight Agency to reopen the investigation into the fraudulent and forged power of attorney. And I was so thrilled I couldn't believe it. I thought, what a breakthrough. This is the moment that somebody's going to finally start listening to Paul and listening to me. But I went to court the next morning to ask the judge to suspend the nun's authority over Paul. But we didn't get on, and I wasn't successful. And when I got back to the hospital, it appeared to me that they had killed Paul. All of his medical supports were removed. I walked into the room, and the nun wouldn't look me in the eye, but she said through gritted teeth, "Say goodbye to Paul, he's dying." But he appeared to be dead already. His eyes were wide open, his pupils were dilated and fixed, and his hand was cool and completely unresponsive. All his medical supports had been removed, his oxygen mask, his ventilator, and he appeared to me to have been sedated to death. I believe that the nun ordered the treating doctor, Michael Baker, to do medical assistance in dying on Paul, although even in Canada, you can't kill people that are not mentally competent, who can't agree. So it's supposed to be offering to kill people and they agree, but Paul was never capable. I had a court order saying he was not capable. He was not a capable person. He never functioned above the level of a 15-month-old infant. So they had stripped away all of his medical supports and he appeared to be dead. And I reported this to the Burnaby RCMP. I said, please treat his death as suspicious. But they never, I believe that the nun thought that if Paul was dead, then the police couldn't investigate the fraudulent forged power of attorney. And she was right, because I never heard from the police again. They never responded at all at that time. After Paul died, then the nun went after me, the Catholic Church and the nun. Although I've been a member of a collection plate paying member of the Catholic Church my whole life. And they went after me and had me designated permanently a vexatious litigant, which is a very rare and unusual designation in Canadian law that removes all of my access to the courts. I can't even file an affidavit without permission of a judge. And even though I had practiced law for 23 years and quite successfully. So after I had been noticing while all of this was going on, that the law had changed about euthanasia in Canada, and I had been posting these little videos about it back in 2021, because they were going to change the law to make it not just terminally ill people, but anybody suffering from an irremediable illness. And of course, it's exploded. And as of Canada Day, July 1st, 2026, the Government of Canada has paid to execute extrajudicially, with no legal oversight whatsoever, 103,000 innocent, vulnerable Canadian citizens. Almost 100% of them are Caucasian, white, of European descent, just like me. So I'm the target population. I had a heart attack in 2016. I've got lupus. I have kidney failure. So I'm precisely the kind of person the Canadian government wants to kill. And so when you're wondering, well, what kind of person would you be looking at? I'm it. I'm ground zero. Now, my background is I was sexually abused as a little girl, as a tiny girl, and it's affected my whole life. And when I was 15, I went into a tailspin and I attempted suicide. And I was just about successful. I took an overdose of barbiturates, and I was saved. But people who are adult or who are survivors of child sexual abuse are much more inclined to have self-injurious thoughts. So it's like punishing them a second time with this euthanasia in Canada. All it takes is a signature of any doctor, any nurse. The worst serial killer in history was a doctor in the United Kingdom named Harold Shipman. And the worst female serial killer in Canadian history was a nurse who killed 11 of her patients, Elizabeth Wettlaufer. So all it takes is a piece of paper. Virtually anyone can be killed now, and it's considered to be discriminatory if any particular group cannot be killed. Canada has killed 45 people today, at least 45 people today. And 5 out of 100, every 100 deaths is caused by a medical doctor administering a lethal injection. So in 2025, Canada killed, under Mark Carney, Prime Minister Mark Carney, and I put the Prime Minister in quotation marks. Well, I won't go into my thoughts about him. He's Irish and had 32 citizenships before applying to become the Prime Minister of Canada. 27 with the European Union with his Irish citizenship, 4 with the United Kingdom and Canada. You know what they say? A slave of 2 masters is a servant of none. So he's not serving the Canadian people at all, and he drove the British economy into the ground, and he's quickly doing the same thing to Canada. But in 2025, Mark Carney himself presided over 17,772 executions, extrajudicial executions. There's no judicial oversight whatsoever. And in 1976, the Parliament of Canada, the elected body, the people that we elected, abolished government killing citizens, capital punishment. My grandfather was a lawyer, then a judge, and 2 of his clients had been hanged, and it took a terrible toll on him. He was very, very depressed about it. But Canada now kills 45 people a day, and autistic people are killed. A woman walked into the Vancouver General Emergency with a sore back, an 84-year-old white lady named Miriam Lancaster. And the first thing they didn't even ask her what was wrong with her. They just offered to kill her. And I'm afraid to go to my doctor, because I'm afraid I'm going to be either offered euthanasia, offered to be killed, or I'll be so fearful of it that I'll have a negative response. So in terms of, I try and discuss a different topic with each one of these little videos, and I ask Copilot, Microsoft Copilot, for subjects, and one of the things that we discussed was Switzerland has a euthanasia program. So the 4 countries in the world, of the 196 countries that have euthanasia, euthanasia to kill their citizens, are Switzerland, Spain, Canada, and the Netherlands. And the Netherlands is kind of a lost cause. I mean, Canada had to rescue them, and Anne Frank was murdered. I mean, they're all, as far as I'm concerned, full of prostitutes and drug and weed addicts. You can't even consider them a proper country. And Spain was under the fascist Franco for pretty much the last 100 years. But Switzerland looks like a well-functioning, stable economy, and in fact, in the decision, the Supreme Court of Canada decision that said that being killed by a doctor was your constitutional right in Canada at taxpayers' expense. The woman was already dead. Her name was Kay Carter. You can look up the case. You should look up the case. Canada and Kay Carter. Her last name was Carter, Carter. And she was dead already when they made the decision. She'd gone to Switzerland and been killed by a doctor in Switzerland. But Switzerland is different than Canada. Canada has a long history of mistreating its citizens. I mean, we're not even over the first genocide of the First Nations people. And there's many politicians that I've noticed who say that their residential schools were not a bad experience, or they weren't as bad as Sir John A. Macdonald, who was really the founder of the residential school system, was my great-grandfather's law partner and a personal family friend. So, I'm well aware of John A. Macdonald, and he did many good things. He was the first prime minister that wanted to have First Nations people have the vote. But there were residential schools, and children were abducted from their families. And sometimes the families fought back. The First Nations families fought back. But usually it was hopeless. And I can tell you, I went to a residential school run by nuns because of I was acting out as a teenager because of being a survivor of child sexual abuse. And so I was sent to a residential school far away. And it was a horrible experience. I became mute. I stopped talking. And my friend tried to commit suicide. And if any food went missing from the kitchen, we would have to stand on our day off on Sunday. We'd have to stand in the gym until somebody confessed to having stolen the food. It was a horrible experience, but at least my parents had the choice of sending me there. And when I begged them to let me come home, they did. But the First Nations people weren't allowed, and many people did die there. So Canada has already got a reputation of being genocidal with regards to its citizens. We're not even out of the woods with that. And then with World War II, we stole all the lands from the Japanese people. My best friend in law school, Karen Tamaki, heard the Tamaki family had all of their land stolen from them, and they were interned throughout World War II, although they were Canadian citizens. Perfectly good Canadian citizens. So Canada has a long history of mistreating, of doing a genocide against its own citizens. And we're not stable economically. We're going down, you can't euthanize your way into economic success. So what I'm telling people is start by never using the government made up propaganda word, this evil government. Did you know that the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada that made it a legal constitutional right to be killed by a doctor at taxpayers' expense in February of 2015. Her name was Beverly McLaughlin. Immediately after making that decision, which has resulted in the extrajudicial execution of 103,000 innocent, vulnerable, white, mostly white Canadian citizens, she went right to China and worked for 6 years as a Court of Appeals judge in Hong Kong for the Communist Party of China. She's a traitor. She's a traitor. And the police should investigate her. That's why there's euthanasia in Canada, because of an anonymous, unanimous decision of the Supreme Court of Canada led by a woman who immediately went to work for the Communist Party of China. So the Communist Party of China has killed, without ever firing a bullet, they've used our own institutions to kill 103,000 innocent, vulnerable Canadians and destroy the morale of this country. But where you can start is never use their made-up government word, MAiD. Even people who oppose it, who fight it, use this made-up word for euthanasia. We've got a perfectly good word for what they're doing, and it's euthanasia and eugenics. They call it medical assistance in dying. Well, the word medical is from the Greek verb to heal, and you don't heal anybody with a lethal injection. So start by never using that word. And let's do everything in our power to throw this Liberal government, this Trudeau and Mark Carney government out. And all the democratic processes created by our founders, everything at our disposal. Because we're not Switzerland. We've got a very bad history of mistreating citizen groups. And the group that is being destroyed right now are disabled, elderly, people of Canadian-born citizens of European descent. That's the genocide. So that's it for now. I love you all. Please take care.